Today, thinking about Disney and Star Wars being linked is pretty easy. It's in our faces all the time because you can't turn on Disney Plus without getting a recommendation for the latest streaming Disney show or, just turn over any toy and look at those logos. And that's because Disney was bought, or rather, Star Wars was bought by Disney. And for good or ill, whatever side of the battle you're on, Disney is the owner of Star Wars, but it wasn't always that way. But their relationship between the brands goes way back. And that's because in 1987, Star Tours landed in Disneyland in Florida, in Anaheim. I think I'd know that. That's where I lived. Yep, it was huge. I mean, this not only was an amazing new ride, but it was kind of some of the only Star Wars content we'd gotten. We weren't getting more movies, after Return of the Jedi. And I was there in 1987 on a trip. Actually, this was before I moved to California. This was a trip our family took, and yeah, riding Star Tours was a big part of my my experience, and waiting in line for Star Tours back then was a big part of my day. But boy, yeah, getting to experience it like that, especially as a child, amazing. Now, the line is sprinkled with a lot of familiar faces to get you into that Star Wars mood. You see some droids that you recognize, of course, R2D2, C3PO, and, well, that's pretty much the only ones you recognize because the others were either kit bashed, made up, on loan from Lucasfilm, repainted, stripped down, repurposed. Well, this is the story of these droids and the way some of them became action figures, because it's one of the more interesting parts of Star Wars toy collecting, and that's why we're covering it today on Spectre Creative. All right, so while you're in line for Star Tours, if you're fortunate to be at a Disney park, and mostly for me, this is all in Anaheim, you see a lot of random droids doing maintenance to the hangar bay. It's to get you in the mood that you are now in a Star Wars world. Some of the faces not so familiar, but you'll get to know them. This is Rex, the new pilot droid, added to the entourage of droids, and eventually, not in time for the ride's launch, but in the early 2000s, Hasbro added Star Tours figures to their lineup. Now, of course, they were only available at the actual parks, so you had to either get a ticket or be an annual pass holder, or have some other means of getting it. You couldn't pick it up at a local toy store. And for people who grew up with the ride, especially if you grew up in Southern California and went there a lot, not only was shopping in the Star Trader a huge, awesome experience because it was the only place you could get Star Wars merch back in the day. I still treasure the pins and mugs that I have that I bought in the late 80s and early 90s there. But because this was, new content in the terms of the ride, it kind of just became part of, well, for me personally, my overall Star Wars experience was going on the ride and shopping at the Star Trader. So when I was able to buy action figures based on the ride, I was excited. Now, we saw three different releases on three different card backs because by the time all of the waves were released, it was over the course of many years. This wasn't a retail line where it got refreshed every few months. These sort of were spread out. They would show up, go away, come back. But by the end, after quite a few years, you wound up with droids from not just the Anaheim park, but also Florida, and I think there's even one from France. We come from France. So you got quite a entourage of droids. Now, for me personally, I was really only interested in the ones that came from the Anaheim park, because that's, again, I grew up in Orange County. The first wave came out right at the beginning of the Saga collection, which was the Episode 2 Attack of the Clones line. Now, while the lineup for retail was in the blue package, the first wave of Star Tours figures were in the older Power of the Jedi, but you'll notice Power of the Jedi as a name has been removed. We had a mixture of Astro droids, original creations. You got the pilot from the Starspeeder, Captain Rex, which predated Captain Rex from the Clone Wars. More on that later. Then the second wave, which came out, actually did have the Saga Collection branding, the later Gold series that was after Attack of the Clones was out of theaters. And notably, that wave included a droid that has never been done in the main line. Now, obviously, there's lots of Astro droids, and while it wasn't George Lucas's intention for the number to relate to the type of dome, that was not what he wanted. That's just something that happened sort of organically. One of those domes, the one known as the binocular dome, because the eyes are actually sort of binoculars poking out. You can see them on the bottom left there, compared to the R5s and the basic R5s that just have dots. The binoculars aren't just, eye dots. They actually do come out of the head. And this is the only droid we've ever had in this style, despite the fact that these droids show up in the 1977 film and the original trilogy. You can see Imperial versions, you can see Rebel versions, and you can see just, random ones from the galaxy. But yeah, the binocular droids are in the original trilogy. They're slightly different than the R5 droid, which has three eyes, and we get one from the Star Tours line because this was an actual prop from Return of the Jedi that just got put into the line. Now, the final wave came in the sort of original trilogy collection packaging, but again, without that actual branding. And then we would continue to get kind of, mixtures again once all of the figures had been done from the original Anaheim park. We started getting them from others. R4M9 in particular is interesting because that was the droid that was actually in A New Hope, but now in different colors. R2 or G240, excuse me, one of the G2 droids here, particularly interesting to note because this was an original creation for Star Tours. So you'll notice the delegation G2ST. Well, ST stands for Star Tours, and G2 stands for Goose Number 2. Why do I say Goose Number 2? This isn't Top Gun. Back in the 70s, there was a attraction at Disneyland called America Sings, and part of that had singing geese. Well, one of the geese kind of just disappeared, guests noted. There used to be 4, and then suddenly there were 3. Whatever happened to that other goose? Well, that goose got brought over to Star Tours, stripped of its fur, and given a new head and was turned into a Star Tours droid. Note the webbed feet and the tail on the G2 droid because it used to be a goose. Now it's a G2 Goose 2 Star Tours droid. So I was particularly excited to get these because, well, they were a big part of waiting in line. They would chat at you while you were there. So getting one for my shelf, it's actually still one that I keep right on my shelf next to my desk because this was a big part of my teenhood, I guess, my teenage years at Disneyland, spending it there. Captain Rex was the pilot of the Star Speeder, and his name had to be changed, or rather, not his name had to be changed, but they had to stop sort of using that. They repurposed this droid as, I think, a bartender, and then he shows up in some of the Disney Plus material, but he was the first Captain Rex. Other droids from the prequels and even the original trilogy would kind of get Star Tours treatment in a couple box sets, but it really was those original releases that gave us the tools, the original versions of the droids from the line. The repaints that came later on were just, more for funsies. And all in all, if you really take a step back, we got some pretty out there droids in this line and some crazy stuff. Not all of them really do even look Star Warsy. That's probably because they were just Disney gooses without their feathers. And of course, our only binocular series Astro droid, even with that battle damage. Now, Star Tours has gone through a lot of changes over the years. I'm still glad it's there, even with the new Galaxy's Edge. It'll always be a big part of my Disney memories, and having the toys as well and being able to collect them is really cool.